Ethan sat quietly inside the transport cabin as the stars drifted past the window. He had been chosen as part of a small team to travel on the Horizon Dawn, a great colony ship that carried hope for peace and trade between distant human settlements. His heart was full of questions. He had grown up hearing stories about faraway kingdoms where rulers lived in shining halls and wore garments made of gold. Among those rulers, one name always appeared in the old records: the Golden Princess. People said she was not only wise, but also beautiful beyond words. They said she wore a golden veil that shimmered like sunlight. Ethan had always imagined her as someone untouchable, almost like a dream. Now he was on his way to meet her in person. The Horizon Dawn glided through space for many weeks. The crew spent the days preparing for the meeting. Ethan kept reading reports about the settlement ruled by Queen Marissa, the woman who was called the Golden Princess. The reports spoke of her skills in guiding her people through hard times, of her ability to keep peace in a place full of rival voices. Ethan felt nervous, but also proud. To stand before someone who carried such a name was more than an honor. It felt like walking into a story that had been written long before he was born. When the ship finally reached the colony, Ethan pressed his face to the glass as the surface came into view. The land was green with wide rivers, and the palace stood high on a hill, covered with walls that sparkled in the sunlight. The design was unlike anything he had seen before. Great towers rose into the sky, and colored windows caught the light in ways that made the palace look alive. He could almost hear music when he looked at it. His heart beat faster as he realized that soon he would walk inside. The crew was welcomed with formal words, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes kept moving toward the grand doors of the throne room. As they opened, the hall shone like a river of glass and gold. Light poured through the stained windows, painting the walls with red, blue, and yellow. At the far end of the hall sat the Golden Princess herself. Ethan's breath caught as he saw her. She was more radiant than the stories had promised. Her gown was woven with golden threads, and a veil of the same fabric fell gently over her hair. The sunlight touched her figure and made her seem like part of the light itself. When she rose from her throne, Ethan felt his chest tighten. Her steps were graceful, her voice calm as she welcomed the visitors. Every movement spoke of control and elegance. For a moment, Ethan forgot where he was. He felt as if he had entered a dream made real. All the long nights of travel and the endless quiet of space seemed far away. Here, in this golden hall, stood a woman who had been the subject of legends, and she was greeting him as though he mattered. Yet beneath the beauty, Ethan sensed something more. The way her eyes lingered on the floor, the way her smile held for just a moment too long, stirred a strange feeling inside him. He pushed it away, telling himself he was only nervous. Still, the image of her veil stayed in his mind. It caught the light in every color, hiding her face in soft shadows. And he wondered why such beauty also carried a sense of distance. He wanted to believe she was as free and perfect as the stories said. He wanted to hold on to that dream. The meeting ended with polite words and bows, but Ethan knew this was only the beginning. He walked out of the hall with his heart full of wonder. He told himself that he had finally met the Golden Princess, the woman he had imagined since childhood. He did not yet know that behind the golden veil there was more to see, more than any legend had told. For now, he only carried the dream, and the dream was bright. The days after the first meeting passed slowly for Ethan. The palace was full of light and music. But behind all the beauty, he felt an air of silence that no one dared to speak of. He was given a small room with stone walls and a window that looked out over the wide fields. Each morning, he would walk through the golden halls to join the rest of the visitors at the council table. The queen, the Golden Princess, always sat at the head. She spoke softly, giving orders and sharing words of peace. The council praised her wisdom, but Ethan noticed that many of them spoke louder than her, sometimes cutting her words short. He thought it strange, but he remained quiet. He was still a guest in her home. During the second evening, Ethan was guided through the palace by a young guard named Daniel. The man told him stories of the place, of how it had been built over many years, and how the queen had ruled since she was young. Daniel spoke with pride, but his eyes carried worry when he mentioned her name. Ethan asked nothing further, but he felt the same weight again that he had felt in the throne room. Something was hidden behind the golden veil. Later that night, there was a feast in the great hall. Long tables were filled with food and music played from stringed instruments. The air was filled with laughter and cheer, but Ethan could not take his eyes off the queen. She sat high above, speaking kindly to those around her, but she never removed her veil. Even when she raised a cup or turned her head, the veil stayed in place, shimmering under the torchlight. To the rest of the crowd, she looked like a goddess. To Ethan, she looked like a mystery waiting to be understood. When the feast ended, Ethan walked alone in the garden. The night air was cool, and the sound of water flowed from the fountain. As he turned the corner, he stopped. There, standing in the silver glow of the moon, was the queen. She was alone, her veil resting gently on her shoulders. She had not noticed him yet, and Ethan froze, unsure if he should stay or leave. Her face was partly in shadow, but he thought he saw something in her expression that was not joy, but sadness. Before he could step forward, another guard appeared, and the queen quickly raised her veil again. She walked back inside without a word, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. The next morning, Ethan attended another council meeting. The discussion was about trade routes and supplies. The queen spoke with calm authority, but once again, her words were pressed aside by stronger voices. Ethan watched closely as one of the council members leaned too close to her. For a brief moment, she flinched, and her hand trembled slightly before she placed it back on the table. The gesture was so small that no one else seemed to notice, but Ethan saw it clearly. His chest tightened. He remembered the sadness in her eyes the night before. And now, he wondered if the truth was hidden not only under her veil, but also in her silence. Ethan spent the day walking through the palace, speaking with servants and guards. Many praised the queen, but when asked about her life, they gave short answers. Some lowered their eyes, others quickly changed the subject. The silence around her was like a wall built to protect something fragile. Ethan felt his curiosity grow stronger. He wanted to know more, but he also feared what he might discover. That evening, as the sun set through the stained glass, the queen entered the hall once more. Ethan watched as she walked past, the light dancing on her golden gown. For a moment, the veil slipped as she turned her head, and in that short instant he thought he saw a faint mark on her cheek. Quickly hidden again by the shimmering fabric, his breath caught, and he knew then that his dream of perfection was beginning to crack. The Golden Princess was not only a figure of beauty, but also a woman carrying a secret. Ethan left the hall with his thoughts heavy, knowing that his journey was no longer just about diplomacy. Something deeper was unfolding before him, and he could not look away. Ethan woke the next morning with his mind restless. He had seen enough to know that the queen's life was not what the stories claimed. The veil that covered her face was more than a symbol of beauty. It was a shield, hiding something she did not want the world to see. He tried to push the thought away, telling himself it was not his place to wonder about the private matters of a ruler, but his heart would not let it go. He had come as a guest, yet each passing day made him feel like he had walked into a secret that no one dared to speak aloud. The palace halls were full of people moving with purpose. Servants carried trays, guards walked their rounds, and members of the council hurried to meetings. To most, the queen was a figure of light. They bowed to her, spoke of her greatness, and repeated the tales of her golden image. But Ethan, who had seen the faint shadow beneath her veil, could no longer see her as untouchable. She was human, and behind the gold was pain. That afternoon there was another gathering. The hall was crowded with voices discussing the future of the colony. The queen sat in her place, the veil flowing over her shoulders as usual. Ethan forced himself to focus on the talks, but his eyes drifted back to her face again and again. When she leaned forward to speak, he caught a glimpse of her jawline beneath the cloth. His breath stilled. There was a bruise, faint but clear, hidden just enough by the fabric. His chest grew heavy, and the world around him blurred for a moment. No one else seemed to notice. The council carried on, their words louder than hers, as if her presence was only ceremonial. Ethan realized the truth was plain to see for those who dared to look, but the people chose silence. That evening, Ethan walked alone through the palace corridors. Golden walls no longer felt like wonders to him. They felt like barriers trapping her inside. As he turned a corner, he heard soft footsteps. To his surprise, the queen appeared from the shadows, moving quietly without her guards. She seemed startled to find him there. For a moment, they looked at one another in silence. Then, with a slow motion, she lifted her veil just slightly, enough for him to see the marks clearly under her skin. Her eyes met his, filled with both shame and strength. Ethan did not speak, but his silence told her he had seen the truth. She lowered the veil again and walked away, leaving him standing still, shaken by the unspoken message. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He thought of her alone in her chambers, carrying wounds, while her people praised her beauty. He thought of the council, their loud voices and controlling presence. He wondered who among them was responsible for the harm she endured. His heart ached with anger and pity. He wanted to protect her, but he was only one man, far from home, with no power to change the order of this place. Still, he knew he could not ignore what he had seen. To pretend would be a betrayal not only to her but to himself. And the next day, during a formal meal, Ethan watched her more carefully. She smiled when spoken to, but her eyes often drifted away as if she was somewhere else. She held herself tall, but her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her cup. The signs were clear to him now, though hidden to others who chose not to see. He wondered how long she had lived like this, trapped behind a veil that turned her pain into mystery. As the meal ended, the queen excused herself. Ethan followed from a distance, not wanting to intrude but unable to stop himself. She entered the palace gardens, walking slowly among the flowers. When she stopped by the fountain, she removed her veil again, letting the cool night air touch her skin. Ethan stepped closer, and this time she did not cover her face. The bruises were clear now, spread across her cheek and neck. Her voice was quiet, almost broken, as she spoke for the first time without formality. She told him not of legends, but of fear. She spoke of power held by cruel hands in the council, of silence forced upon her, of duty that became a chain. Her words were heavy, yet her eyes held fire. Ethan listened with every part of his being, knowing this was not just a story. This was her truth, and it changed everything. In that moment, Ethan no longer saw a queen of gold or a dream of beauty. He saw a woman fighting to endure, stronger than the tales, braver than the legends. He knew then that his journey was not about trade or diplomacy. It was about standing beside someone who carried more weight than anyone should. And in his heart, he made a quiet promise that he would not let her stand alone. Ethan walked back to his room that night with his heart heavy. The queen's words echoed in his mind. She had spoken of fear of a council that controlled her, of bruises hidden behind the veil. He could still see her eyes in the moonlight, full of strength but also full of pain. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, knowing he could not turn away from what he had learned. He had been sent for peace and trade, but now his mission felt different. It was no longer about papers or agreements. It was about a human life caught inside walls of gold. The next day, Ethan entered the council chamber with sharper eyes. He noticed the way certain men leaned closer to the queen, speaking over her words. He noticed how she remained quiet when their voices grew louder. He saw the flicker of discomfort in her face whenever one council member, Lord Harrington, pressed his hand too firmly on the table near her. Ethan studied each moment with care. To most in the room, it was politics. To Ethan, it was cruelty hidden in plain sight. After the meeting ended, Ethan walked in the palace courtyard. He found Daniel, the guard who had spoken to him before. Ethan asked about the queen again, but this time his tone was sharper. Daniel looked around before answering. His voice was low, and his eyes were full of unease. He told Ethan that many in the palace loved the queen but were powerless. The council held the true power, and the queen was forced to wear the golden veil to hide the marks of their control. Daniel warned Ethan to be careful. To speak too openly could bring danger not only to himself, but to her as well. Ethan thanked him, but the warning only made his resolve stronger. That night, Ethan stood in the garden once more. The queen appeared again, her veil lifted just slightly as she walked near the fountain. This time, she spoke to him without hesitation. She told him how long she had lived in silence. She told him of her duty to protect her people, even while suffering in secret. Her voice shook, but she stood tall, as if the truth itself gave her strength. Ethan listened closely, and then he spoke. He told her that he had seen her pain, that he could not ignore it. For the first time, the queen smiled a small, sad smile. She told him that no one had ever dared to speak to her like that, In her eyes, he saw both gratitude and fear. Ethan began to plan quietly. He could not challenge the council openly, but he could find allies. He started speaking with servants, guards, and common folk in the city outside the palace. He asked them about their queen. The answers were always the same. They loved her. They called her kind, fair, and gentle. Yet when he asked why she always wore the veil, their voices dropped. Some looked away, others changed the subject, but their silence told him the truth. They all knew, but they were afraid. Ethan returned each night to the garden, and each night the queen spoke more freely. She told him about her father who had ruled before her, about the dream she once carried of leading her people with joy. She told him how that dream had been taken from her by men who saw her as a symbol rather than a person. Ethan listened with respect, and each word deepened his resolve. He could not change the world alone, but he could stand beside her, could help her find her voice again. The more time they spent together, the more Ethan saw her true strength. She was not only a ruler bound by chains, but a woman who longed to rise above them. She laughed softly at times, remembering her youth, and in those moments he saw a glimpse of the person she had been before the veil. But then the shadows returned, and the marks beneath her skin reminded him of the danger she faced every day. Ethan began to gather quiet support. Daniel, the guard, agreed to stand with him. A few servants whispered their loyalty. Even some merchants in the city who had suffered under unfair council demands showed interest in change. It was not much, but it was the beginning of something larger. Ethan knew the risk. The council would not let go of their power easily. But he also knew that silence was no longer an option. The queen deserved more than a life of bruises hidden in gold. As he stood once more under the night sky, looking at the palace glowing with torchlight, Ethan made his choice. He would not leave her trapped in silence. He would fight, not with weapons, but with truth. The queen had been called the Golden Princess, but to him, she was more than a symbol. She was a person worth standing beside, no matter the cost. Ethan felt the weight of his decision with every passing day. The queen continued to hide her pain behind the veil, but now she had someone who knew the truth. She no longer had to carry the silence alone. Their secret meetings in the garden grew longer, and their words grew bolder. She told him that she feared the council, but also feared what might happen if she spoke out. Ethan told her that change always came with risk, but silence was a slower kind of death. The queen listened, her eyes steady, and Ethan could see her courage slowly awakening. The council grew more restless with Ethan's presence. They noticed how often he watched the queen, how carefully he listened when she spoke. Lord Harrington, who always pressed his power over her, glared at Ethan during meetings. The tension in the room grew heavier each day. Ethan knew his time was running short. If he stayed too long without action, the council might move against him. He also knew that if he left without helping her, he would never forgive himself. One night, the queen met Ethan by the fountain again. The moon shone bright and her veil was lowered. She spoke of her fears, but this time she also spoke of hope. She said that people loved her, and that perhaps they would stand with her if they saw her truth. Ethan told her that they would, because people follow not only crowns but courage. She looked at him with eyes full of both fear and strength, and she whispered that she was ready. The next morning, the great hall was filled with people. The council had called for another meeting to discuss trade, but the queen had other plans. As she entered the hall, the light from the stained glass windows fell across her gown. Ethan stood near the edge of the room, his heart pounding. This was the moment. The queen reached the throne, and instead of sitting, she stopped. Slowly, with hands that trembled only slightly, she lifted her veil away and let it fall to the ground. Gasps filled the hall. The marks on her face were clear under the morning light. For a moment, silence gripped the chamber. Then she began to speak. Her voice was calm but strong, carrying across the golden walls. She told them that she would no longer hide. She told them that the veil had been a prison, not a crown. She spoke of the pain she endured, not with shame but with pride, because she had survived. Her words broke the silence that had bound the palace for years. Ethan watched as the people began to stir, their eyes no longer blind to the truth before them. Lord Harrington rose, his face dark with anger. But before he could speak, the hall erupted with voices. Servants, guards, and even merchants who had gathered at the back began to shout their support for the queen. Daniel, the young guard, stepped forward and declared his loyalty to her. More voices joined until the sound shook the chamber. The queen stood tall, her scars visible, but her spirit brighter than gold. Ethan felt a rush of pride. She had found her strength, and the people had found their courage. The council tried to argue, but their voices were drowned by the crowd. The queen lifted her hand, and the hall fell quiet again. She declared that no council would ever hold power over her again. She declared that from that day forward, her people would see not a golden image, but a true leader who would fight for them openly. Her words were like fire, spreading from one heart to another until the hall was alive with hope. Ethan knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The council would resist, and there would be struggles. But the veil was gone, and the truth was free. That truth was stronger than any chain. The queen looked at Ethan across the hall, and though she said nothing, her eyes spoke enough. She was no longer alone, and neither was he. When the meeting ended, the people poured into the streets, speaking of the moment they had seen. They spoke of the queen not as a distant figure, but as one of their own. The golden veil that had once hidden her pain was gone, and in its place was a new story, one of courage and strength. Ethan walked among them, knowing he had been part of something greater than himself. He had come to meet a legend, but he had found a human heart that refused to be broken. And in that heart, he had seen the true power of humanity. The Golden Princess was no longer a dream. She was real, and her truth was brighter than any gold.